is shared. My life is sharing with a starving world the love of Christ that fills me. The quiet seed was sown in my restless heart before I ever knew that it was there. Life was so full, and God would... It was our graduation day. God's call came clear and firm. The speaker challenged us to seek true happiness and said we'd find it in high dedication, a life of consecrated love. He might have meant some service. No, he wanted me. The day was crowded with congratulations and farewells, good wishes, laughter, and goodbyes. But as I laid my roses at our mother's feet, my graduation wish was actually a prayer, that I'd find my happiness, and if it meant a dedication to big things, that I could count on Mary's strength to supply for all my weaknesses and meager heart. Back home, I knew for sure the plans I'd made for college years of fun were empty dreams. I must face life and know that if I'd find true peace and happiness, I must decide, but not tonight. And then full days of summer joys. We did just everything. The opening of the club and rounds of golf. Refreshing hours at the lake. I love to ski. Tennis always was my favorite sport. I'd entered city meets and won a trophy, all in fun. Dances and gay parties filled the days and nights. Life was so good. But through it all, I knew God called. This wasn't happiness, it was just fun. The kids were swell. The games were as they'd always been. But quietly, inside, I longed for something else. I half feared it was that dedication which brings peace. One afternoon, I went alone. There was no wind for sailing, but I needed peace to think it out. What guarantee had I God wanted me? There were no signs, no bolt out of the blue. But that's where faith comes in. Would God have planted this desire, then leave my tortured soul to wander harborless? What was it God would have of me? A lay apostle could do big things, but somehow, deep inside, I knew God asked the fullest gift of me. Not just the fruit, but tree and roots and all. I parried with the thought of Christian motherhood, my sons as priests, and daughters given to God. But then to mother souls, unnumbered saved because I was God's bride. There's no comparison. How could I know? I'd ask Sister for advice. She knew God's ways, and best of all, she knew me too. And so we talked it out. When I heard her speak of consecrated love, a life for God, I knew the dedication to high things that would bring peace. To think, God wanted me. I mentioned it to Father, to be sure. He too spoke of giving my humanity to God, that in my life he now might love a suffering world. The convent, as he said, was not the only way, but it was the best, the surest, most complete. And after all, if that was what God asked of me, ought I desire another way? I had to break the news to Mom. I knew she'd understand. She would smile and tell me she was proud. She said a life of happiness was all she sought for me. And if this sacrifice would mean my joy, she'd offer it with all her love. She warned it would be hard. She asked if penance and a life's denial seemed a little thing. She wanted to be sure that I was sure. Would she tell Dad? It wasn't quite so easy to tell him. He'd seen his tomboy grow from pigtails and her jeans to party frills, in love with life in every stage. How could he know she reached up now for higher stars, beyond his fairest dreams for her? But Mom and Dad were swell. They knew God well, and in their bold familiarity asked whatever God could do with me, their child. I wrote and asked admission. Sister said that was the way. I told them that I thought God wanted me, and if they thought it was okay, I'd tell him yes. And then those anxious days of waiting for reply. Maybe I was just a bit presumptuous. After all, I was an ordinary girl. No halo yet, no pious prayers. I just thought perhaps God wanted me, and if he did... And then the letter came. The red tape had been cut and all formalities were cleared. I could begin to get my things. The news of convent plans had spread like fire. The girls thought something must be wrong. How could I waste my life? I loved it so. Somehow they failed to realize that it was love, a high romance that knows no peace, till life is spent for him on those he loves. A shower of dear remembrances has kept them in my prayers. I'll never know why God called me instead of others who deserved the gift. The day of entry came. I found a leaden ache deep in my heart. Somehow all this seemed too much, too big for me. I couldn't say goodbye. There were no words. We just left home. Our hearts said all our lips refused to say. The drive was long. We joked of little things, not daring to reveal what we all felt. The welcome at the convent brought me peace and told me I'd come home. It was God's house, and all we met who were his brides spoke wordlessly of love. Yes, this I knew was it, my way to happiness. And that decision which had brought me here was stronger now in its demands than it had ever been. While I went off to don my convent garb, Mom chatted with our mother, whom she learned to love. A bond was formed that day. 2 families share me as their own, and years have since then brought them closer still. When I returned, the glow of pride in my folks' eyes gave me the calm persuasion they were glad, and that the ache of parting would be soothed because they now were sure this meant true joy for me. And so my life as candidate began. We had a picnic in the grove that day to break the ice. All the girls were just the kind I'd hoped they'd be. A lot of fun, real kids. The kind you'd like to work and play and grow and pray among. That evening, we said our first prayer at the statue of the Sacred Heart. We felt that we'd been welcomed by his outstretched arms and gathered in and bound for always in his love. The next day, at the crack of dawn, the bell, I've learned to reverently despise, began our days of prayer and work for God. We learned early that the Mass would be the center of our lives. From it, we draw the strength we need to live each day for God alone. In it, the best we have to give is made Christ's gift to God for us. There was so very much to do to shape us into tools the Lord could use. Rough edges of our worldly ways were sanded down. We learned of the decorum that guards a climate where the mind of Christ is formed. Instructions opened out to us, undreamed of beauties of this holy state, and fanned to flame the tiny sparks of love of God our souls had known. A day of college classes introduced us to a broadening world of truth, so geared that we would be the best of what the church needs in our day. Because for some, we'd be their lone reminder there's a God, St. Thomas theology was at the core of our curriculum. The first philosophies we took will serve us well to keep our sights set on our goal, our vision clear. And whether it was French, or art, or literature, we found in truth a bit of God, and were inspired with a hearty eagerness to learn that we might someday teach. Might someday share the fundamental truths a microscope revealed, or the secrets of God's goodness discovered in a lab. We had our lighter moments, too. In them, we found the joy of childlike, wholesome fun. To almost every game we played, the day when we'd be teaching added new significance. Someday, young faces would turn eagerly to us, and since we'd known their games, we then could win their souls through play as well as prayer. Our younger sisters often matched us at our games. Aspirants are the high school girls whose young hearts even now had come to learn the ways of God. Their early gift had made their sacrifice so like our patron Agnes that we saw the likeness even as we played. And then there were those household jobs that keep our feet on solid ground. The flights of high philosophy and literature's romances might cause us to forget that dear humility that is Agnesian to the core. Dusting floors or shining window panes provided soil in which simplicity took root. It helps the woman in us grow, gives us that domestic touch. One day we'll add a note of joy to our new mission home. And often in the day we'd come to him, to tell him of our cares and of our love. He knew how hard we tried, of the mistakes we'd made and what we hoped to be. The days flew by. A year of preparation left much to be done. Investing day drew near. The silence of retreat lent reverence to those final touches on our bridal gowns. That evening was a solemn one. We went reverently in silent awe to meet the bishop at the chapel door. My heart beat wildly. Until now it seemed all this was meant for someone else. But when I heard him ask us our desire, I answered, and prayed to live each word I said. We ask for the habit of the daughters of St. Agnes. We desire to lead penitential lives and serve God faithfully. The choir intoned the bridal march, O Jesus, Crown of Virgins. We went down the aisle to make our gifts to all those things the world holds dear. We offered something that would symbolize the sacrifice we made. Mine was a single string of pearls, each jewel a separate gift. My home, my mom and dad, promises of fun and money and success, devoted love, a family of my own, a home, and all the happiness this world could give. I was aware that I had much to give, but oh, I was so positive that now, since I had nothing, I had all. I am all God's, and all He has is mine. In silent joy, I joined the choir to sing. My heart o'erflows with happiness, my spouse, my King whom I had loved, believed in, and desired. To remind us there's no room for vanity, the bishop cut a lock of hair. He prayed that our surrender to God's love would find us always in His care. The triple prayer in blessing of our habits made them symbols of humility, a sign of saintliness, a strong defense against the enemy. May our Lord clothe you with justice and true sanctity. I have the habit of the Sisters of St. Agnes. Grant that I may wear these garments for thy greater honor. We left to vest as sisters. I thought of Mom and Dad. I hoped some of the peace and joy that filled my heart was theirs tonight. God's not outdone in generosity, so I felt sure that since the greater gift was theirs, His love would be their strength. Though we had practiced it before, I didn't know that putting on the garb would mean so much. I prayed that every day would find me less unworthy of so great a grace. Our earlier decisions had meant happiness for them, but at this step, our happiness increased until we thought our hearts would burst with joy. Heaven's King had chosen us His brides. When we returned, the veils and satin of the youthful brides had been replaced by signs of dedication to a thorn-crowned spouse. We were in black, to symbolize we died to worldly glamour and display. But we knew real life had just begun. When Mother and the Bishop placed the veils upon our heads, I thought its weight was like a crown. I hadn't earned it, true. The gift was mine, since God is good. I heard them pray that we might persevere and find in heaven our eternal love. A wreath of blossoms called to mind our heavenly crowns and served as a reminder that our days of whole-souled giving are rewarded in eternity by jewels we fashion by our love. The candle, symbol of the light of truth and warmth of love of Christ, our spouse. May my life be consumed as is this candle wax, and in its burning give His warmth and light to all I meet. I heard the bishop call my name. It had a ring of strange finality. It was the last time it was mine. A new beginning of a life in God was marked by a new name. Sister Mary Margaret I am now. The bishop counseled us to bear our names with dignity, to live as would become the brides of Christ. We now were His. I spent that night in rapturous joy. The full impact of all we said and done was a promise made for keeps. There were no vows, but God took me at my word. Yes, I was His. We both knew what I meant. The next day, we could see our moms and dads. We'd just been home to visit them in June, and they would come again. But those hours were like nothing we had known. It must have been a new bride's happiness. The novitiate enclosure had been wrapped around us fledgling nuns, and we gave our souls to gentle hands for shaping. We had a year when every hour was geared to loving God. Our work was chiefly in His house. There the seeds of recollection which were sown could send down solid roots and be foundations for a life of prayer. Books by masters in the spirit's realm provided food for thought and growth toward God. Those peaceful hours in the cloister walk were climate for real strides in learning Christ. And we had hours when we learned the art of prayer from Christ Himself. The needs of all the world became our care. Since they were His, they were an object also of our fervent prayers. The simplest work took on a new significance. Our unit of the mystic Christ would do its share that all might be restored in Him. A strong esprit de corps developed in our group, pride in our community, an interest in its past, and loving care for years ahead grew during days of working as a team. A term we learned, the common life, was not now just a phrase. It meant a family sharing all that God had sent our way and counting on the best the others had to give. Our prayers, our time, and not the least of all, our fun. Wholesome, childlike fun to balance off the really serious things that must be done. taught us of the vows we'd make, what they'd mean to God, and the giving they'd demand of us. We had all the chance we'd need to test the stuff of which we're made, to know before we took the step if we had what it takes to scale the peaks and reach the summit of God's love on this Agnesian path. We learned to love the Psalms. Our office every day became our source of strength. The church's prayer swept all our paltry personal pleas up to God's throne, and because it was His Son who prayed, we knew our Father would receive our prayer in Mary's name. A second-year novitiate allowed us to resume our scholastic work. The Spirit's growth remained our chief concern. College classes were begun again to show us that a life of prayer is really one of giving, that in seeking we must also serve, and in serving always seek. The final days before we made our vows were spent in silence of retreat. We had 3 years in preparation for this day. We learned that God had chosen us, and not we Him, that we can count on Him since we are weak, and that a life of love is much too short to prove our gratitude. We made our vows right after Mass. We placed ourselves in spirit on the paten with the host, and prayed God to accept us in Christ's name, and by His power to transform us into instruments that He could use. Confidence, we placed ourselves in Mother's hands, and loud enough for all to hear, pronounced our vows, a solemn promise made to God that we are His. In poverty, He is my wealth. In chastity, my love. In obedience, my will. We made our vows for just 3 years, but each of us within our heart meant, for life, God. The white veil of the novice was replaced by Sister's black to symbolize we're hidden now in God. The offering of our lives is now complete. Somehow the thrill just short of ecstasy that I had known in vesting night was now a deeper, peaceful joy. A sense of calm security came with the knowledge of a contract sealed. Probation and a time of testing now were done. A rich green crown, a symbol of the fruitful life God would expect of us, replaced the blossoms of investiture. It seemed somehow we'd started to grow up. The inner life meant everything to us. Christ lives in us. It is no longer we. His Excellency gave us each a copy of our rule. We studied it as novices. We learned to see in it the map which charts our course. We know God has approved of it because it has Rome's seal. We know we can't go wrong in following it, and what peace, what calm security this knowledge brings. And that was all. The ceremony ended. We are God's own. Our lives are His to live. Our older sisters made their vows for life that day. Plain gold rings were placed upon their fingers as a pledge of their fidelity. I begged God for the grace to reach that day 6 years from now, when I'd be His forever. The crown of thorns that each received reminded all of us that He to whom we are espoused had been a thorn-crowned king. To share the glory that He won for us, we must also wear His crown. They each received a crucifix, Christ's own pledge of boundless love. We entered then our final year before our active work for God began. We were very much aware of all yet to be done before the instruments were ready for God's use. A deepening of our life of prayer gave purpose to all else we learned to do. Those of us whom God would use to shape young minds received the best our college had to give. Sisters shared with us their wealth of wisdom. And beneath their guiding hand, we learned the art of molding youth into the pattern that is Christ. Would bring Christ to the suffering sick, learned all the nursing arts from skillful hands. The courses led to a degree, it's true, but the precious task of the soul's care remained beyond the scope of credits or degrees. Some sisters were technologists, skilled specialists within a special field. Besides their classes, there were hours of practice, of learning in the lab. But whatever kind of work we learned to do, we had those lovely hours with the sisters whom we learned to know and love. I was so proud to think that I belonged. This is a chosen band, God's very own. And by his own kind love, I too am his. Today has come, as we all knew it must. Departure day. For each of us, there is a corner of God's vineyard where there's work for us to do. It was for this he called us here. to learn his truth, to find his way, to be inflamed with his own love, and then to bear his message to a starving world.